Are you brave enough to drive up this mountain road? The 27-mile-long Catalina Highway Scenic Drive in Tucson, Arizona is without a doubt one of the most scenic drives in the Southwest. In just a matter of minutes, you can go from the hot, unforgiving heat of the desert to the cool, relaxing temps of the high forest. However, some of these tight turns and sheer drop offs might have you thinking otherwise if you don't do well with heights. We started our drive at the base of Mt.Lemmon, and the goal is to hopefully make it all the way up the mountain where I will grab a cookie and a hot chocolate at the famous Cookie Cabin. I'll also tell you a little bit about the history of the highway. As I was preparing to make my climb up the mountain, the one thing I was overwhelmed with was the amount of cacti throughout the hills. The saguaro cactus is an icon of the desert and undoubtedly one of the most recognized features in Arizona. The saguaro cactus can grow to an average height of 40 feet, and the tallest saguaro measured stood at an astonishing 78 feet. They can live up to 200 years, but don't start growing arms until the age of 95 to 100. They do grow at a very slow rate, and it can take up to 10 years for a saguaro cactus to reach 1 inch in height, according to NPS.gov. There's a thing you know. Mount Lemmon is located northeast of Tucson, Arizona, and it is the highest point in the Santa Catalina Mountains with an elevation of 9,159 feet. Here's a snapshot of the route that we'll be taking today. Just by looking at all the twists and turns cutting through the mountains, I knew it was going to be a pretty eventful drive. Now, depending on who you are, where you grew up, and how you heard about this drive, you may refer to it as something different. And what I mean by that is, it goes by several different names, with the most popular being Mt.Lemmon Highway. But it also goes by Mt.Lemmon Scenic Byway, Catalina Highway Scenic Drive, the Sky Island Scenic Byway, and the General Hitchcock Highway. And we'll come back to this in just a moment. Mt.Lemmon Highway is the only paved road that leads to the upper part of the Santa Catalina mountain range. It is a very smooth ride with guardrails in place and many pull-out areas so you can stop, let your kids out, and let the wife check her Facebook while you enjoy a nice smoke break overlooking the vistas. Just make sure you put it out safely. And I would encourage anyone coming up here to stop in at all the overlooks. Each stop offers a different view, and there's interpretive signs that tell you all about the wilderness, geology, wildlife, and pollution. As abundant as these cacti were at the start of the drive, after a few minutes on the road, they started to disappear, like dollar bills at a strip club. That, right there in the center, ladies and gentlemen, is called Thimble Peak. Just up the road from this stop was another viewing point I remember stopping in at about 4 years ago when I was last out here. There was a series of waterfalls down in the canyon called Seven Cataracts, and they were lightly flowing. Anxious to see if there might be a little waterfall action going on down there, I got in my car and hurried on over. But when I got there and looked down into the canyon, it was drier than my mouth on 420, so I just continued on up the mountain. Another fascinating lesson that I learned on the way up the mountain from one of the many signs was that this short 27-mile drive is the biological equivalent to driving from the deserts of Mexico to the forests of Canada, without driving hundreds of miles across the country. And with every 1,000-foot gain in elevation, the temperature drops around 5 degrees. So, depending on what season you're doing this drive, by the start of it, you could be wearing shorts, a tank top, and getting your suntan on. But by the time you get to the top of the mountain, you may need your parka, boots, and gloves. Always be prepared. Now, at this point in our drive, you can see how much greener our surroundings have become the higher we go. But one can't help but wonder, driving on a winding road like this that hugs the edges of the cliffs and cuts through the mountains, whose idea was it to build a road up the mountain, and how long did it take? It could not have been easy. Way before the paved Mt.Lemmon Highway that we know today existed, prior to the 1930s, the only way up the mountain was through the back side via a rough dirt road, which was often a long commute. And I invite you to pull it up on Google Earth and take a look. On Google Earth, it's called Old Mt.Lemmon Road, and it's full of numerous switchbacks, and to be honest, it just looks like hell. Back in the day, the road was so narrow that if two cars met coming up and down the mountain, they would be unable to pass, and I'm guessing someone had to back up until there was enough room to get around. They eventually came up with a system that would allow cars to go one way at a time, and they would rotate back and forth. A logical solution at the time, but not the most efficient. There was a proposal in the early 1920s to build a road on the south side of the mountain, but that idea was eventually shot down. But as quickly as that proposal was rejected, it was soon brought back to life by General Frank Harris Hitchcock after he had made several trips up to Mount Lemmon to escape the heat. He was a man that had many connections and knew quite a few people in high places. He served in various high level federal positions, including the office of Postmaster General. According to TucsonSentinel.com, he was part of a partnership that purchased the Tucson Citizen in 1910 and later came to Tucson in 1928 to run the paper. But after a birdwatching trip in 1930, he sort of became the spokesperson for a new road up to Mount Lemmon. And after pulling a few strings and using his connections, construction on the highway began in 1933. However, this was no easy task. Progress was slow and construction was difficult. According to library.pima.gov, it was built mostly by labor from the federal prison camp established for this purpose. In the beginning, most of these laborers were minor offenders from a federal prison located in Texas, but after World War II, the area was also used as an internment camp for Japanese Americans who were forced to work on the highway. Because of these events, there is now a campground on the mountain dedicated to Gordon Hirabayashi, who was known for his resistance to the Japanese Americans' internment camps. I'll post a link in the description below, and I implore anyone watching to read the article because it is a very inspiring story and talks about the not so bright and shiny parts of U.S. history. The Mount Lemmon Highway was eventually completed by 1950 and underwent additional improvements in the 1980s and 1990s. Prior to these improvements, though, the road was regarded as one of the most dangerous in the state. Now we are approaching my absolute favorite stop on the highway. This is called Windy Point Vista, and in my opinion, it has the best views on the mountain. It was pretty hazy far out in the distance, but you could still make out Tucson down below. The views from up here are absolutely stunning, and you can get a great perspective of how high up in the sky you are. There is a fair amount of parking up here, along with trash cans and bathrooms, so if you gotta send a fax or pay the water bill, this is a great place to do it.
I finally said, I am smiling. We laughed our heads off over that.
After checking out the sights and grabbing a quick snack, it was time to head back on the road. The sun was getting real low, and I still had 11 miles until I reached Summerhaven.
A few moments later.
The shadows on the pavement were getting longer, the temp was dropping, and my frickin' check engine light came on. Again! That aside, we were closing in on our destination. But as I was cruising through the forest, I was thinking to myself about the types of wildlife that might be around here. So I did some research when I got home, and I learned that some of the wildlife that inhabits the area includes mountain lions, black bears, wild turkeys, white-tailed deer, Mexican spotted owls, cotamundis, and of course, everyone's favorite, rattlesnakes and scorpions. Frickin' hate those things. Now, I won't say which one, but I happened to spot one of these animals as I was making my way down the mountain, so make sure you stick around till the very end because I'll show you what I captured on my camera. Another interesting topic that surfaced when I was doing research for this video was grizzly bears, and no, Arizona does not have grizzly bears. Anymore. According to AZDailySun.com, though largely forgotten in northern Arizona today, grizzlies once roamed freely in places like Oak Creek Canyon and the San Francisco Peaks. Less than 100 years ago, grizzlies could be found from the Chiricahua Mountains near the Mexican border to the White Mountains of eastern Arizona. But as European Americans began pouring into the region in the 19th century, grizzlies were perceived as an economic threat to the emerging southwestern livestock culture, and by 1935, the last Arizona grizzly had been destroyed. After a couple of hours of driving through the mountains and making a few stops, we finally made it to the little mountain community of Summerhaven. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I absolutely love places like these that are tucked away in the mountains, especially around the holidays. I've been wanting to stop in at the cookie cabin ever since my last visit up here back in 2021. Feels like forever ago. I wish I could have stayed longer, but I was on a little bit of a time constraint. It was late in the day and there weren't too many people there, but check out the size of this cookie. This thing was freaking huge. After a long drive from Phoenix and the temperature dropping, this cookie hit the spot. Now it was $9, but you know what? It was well worth it. I also got a root beer float and a hot chocolate to go. Mission accomplished. But hey, don't go anywhere just yet, because now I'm going to show you what I saw on my way down the mountain. The color of the landscapes on my way down the mountain was pretty amazing. I didn't even plan for it, and I happened to catch golden hour at the right time. You can even see the sun about to dip behind the mountains in the distance. Now, as I was coming around the curve, I happened to spot a few black spots off the side of the road that were moving. From a distance, I couldn't make out what they were, but as I got closer, I knew they were an animal of some sort. I just didn't know what the heck they were. But they were moving very fast, so I got out of my car and went in for a closer look. What you just saw were cotamundis. They're members of the raccoon family and are native to South America, Central America, Mexico, and southwestern United States. When I spotted them off the road, my first thought was, oh, maybe it's raccoons. But I've seen plenty of raccoons in my days, and I knew these weren't raccoons. They were extremely fast, and as soon as I pulled over, they scattered like a bunch of druggies in a trap house. I think I probably saw 5 or 6 of them in total, and this was right on the edge of the road. So once they were out of sight, I backed off, on account of I didn't want to fall off the edge and kick the bucket. But if you thought these little critters were cool, you know what else would be cool? You clicking on the next video and keeping the adventures going. We'll see you next week.